Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we're talking about yet another Minnesota Vikings victory. Vikings go into FedEx Field and defeat the Washington Redskins 38-30. A beauty of a performance for Keenum today, at least for the better part of about 3 quarters, it seemed. Solid rushing attack. Once again, Mackenzie Alexander gets his first interception. Kai Forbath hits 5 extra points in 5 attempts. Low-key, pretty nice. So there's a lot of different things to discuss. Obviously, we'll have to talk about the whole Teddy Bridgewater dilemma that we will be inevitably facing for the next week or so here, if not even longer. So a lot to talk about today, so let's jump right into it, starting with a word from our sponsor here. SOCOM Creative. Is your website ugly? It's time for an upgrade. It's almost 2018. If your website doesn't look good on a smartphone, you're losing money. That's just how it is. It's time to call an audible. Take your business to the next level with professional quality website or mobile app, and thank us later. The world is changing. It's time to score touchdowns. Stop missing field goals. If you want your business to grow online, you need a web, social media, and mobile presence that gets the job done. SOCOM Creative, they build apps, websites, and create winning strategies. Check them out at www.socomcreative.co. All right, so let's get into some Minnesota Vikings stuff here. It's tough to start anywhere other than with Case Keenum. Pretty impressive showing for the most part out of him. Dropped in a handful of absolutely beautiful throws all over the field to Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, who both turned in strong performances. But it's also difficult to ignore those 2 interceptions. Not terrible decision making, at least on the first one, potentially on the second one as well. Throwing the ball up into triple coverage, a little questionable. I think you mentioned this on Twitter during the game. He was uneven once again. That's who Case Keenum has kind of become.
Yep.
Case uneven.
This was an extreme case of it. Yeah. Like, no pun intended, kind of.
Maybe
not really.
Maybe pun intended.
Yeah.
I don't know. This was, he looked awesome at points, and, it's really great to see that he's spreading the ball around. 4 touchdowns by 4 different players. It's nice to see David Morgan get his first touchdown of his career. Maybe he'll finally get like a L'Oreal commercial or something like that. I was impressed with what Case Keenum did for the most part. I thought that he looked good once again, but he didn't alleviate any of my concerns regarding him being erratic, because that's exactly what he was once again today. Very strong at different points. A couple of those throws, the over the shoulders catch by Diggs down the right sideline was extremely impressive. He has shown an ability to drop in, passes with good touch, and sometimes
he has about 2 or 3 of those just downfield dimes.
Right, but then there's the interception, and it's so difficult for me to look past, especially the first interception.
He had a couple of, I think probably intermediate throws that sailed on him too that should have been picked. There was 2 of them that should have been picked, or at least the Redskins had the opportunity to that weren't. So
he was, So this is obviously the dilemma now. The Vikings just won in a fashion that we haven't seen them win in a while. They won basically a shootout, a game that got into the mid-30s. I don't think, I think both of us this was a concern for us, throughout the year. Could the Vikings win if the defense falters? And I think we got an answer in that regard to some degree, but that only adds to the problem here. There have been reports circulating that the Vikings were intending to start Teddy Bridgewater next week, but Case Keenum comes out with a performance like this, and, for the most part, very strong performance, right? By Keenum, I think we could both agree to that, but then there's the question mark still. So that we have a real dilemma at this point. It becomes a matter of which one do you pick here? The guy that you intended to be your starting quarterback, your franchise quarterback, or the guy who has begun to show signs of potentially being that guy? It's which side are you on? So, what did you think of Case Keenum's performance today, and did he do enough to fend off Teddy Bridgewater for another week, in your opinion?
Well, no, and I thought Keenum today was rock solid. As far as he's showing over and over now that he's one of the premier backup quarterbacks in the league. And today, I think he showed that. I thought, for one, I think we need to give credit to Pat Shurmur. Yes. I thought his game plan, his play calling, his scheming was phenomenal today, yes. And I thought that really made things easier for Case Keenum. Because I'm thinking back on this game, and with the exception of there was the Diggs long play down the field, there was the Keenum throw, or the Thielen catch down the field as well, and then the touchdown throw to Thielen I thought was a tight window as well. But other than those three plays, I can't think of a tight window throw that Keenum made outside of those three off the top of my head. It just seemed like guys either were, whether it was Thielen on that poke from the slot that got open, or it was just scheming and great play calling by Shurmur, but it seemed like guys were fairly open for Keenum. So, and I'm not trying to say Teddy would have done better, Teddy would have done the same, whatever. We'll never know that, but
right.
Overall, I thought Keenum played a Keenum game. And he just happened to have an extra touchdown pass or two in there because that was what the Vikings called the goal line, especially with that that David Morgan touchdown in particular. So, I mean, I don't know. I still, my philosophy is the same as far as who should be the starting quarterback, and it's Teddy Bridgewater. But I'm not. I definitely understand those that think Keenum should stick. The Vikings should stick with Keenum. There's definitely valid rationale there.
Okay, so we're going to use the same model that I used on last week's show here. Case Keenum obviously comes out with another strong performance today. I made the argument in a small format that this was arguably the best we have ever seen Case Keenum play at any point in his entire career, including the Tampa Bay game. I think that up until that first interception, he was playing the best football he has ever played. Now, this is what this question leads to now in my head regarding who should start next week. Is this level of play, is that the ceiling for him, and is this something that he can do consistently? And if so, do you believe that this level of play is good enough to win a Super Bowl? So you answer that question in your head. If the answer to that in your head is yes, Case Keenum is going to be your guy. That's the guy that you're going to side with here. That's your decision. Your opinion is valid at this point, in my opinion, because you have seen Case Keenum come out there and play well enough to potentially win a Super Bowl given a strong defensive effort in combination. Now, at the same time, this is the argument that I fall under and will continue to fall under, is I'm not sure that he is still playing well enough, and more specifically, consistently enough to get the Vikings to the Super Bowl and to win the Super Bowl. I think that he's playing well enough at this point, again, in combination with this defense, to get the Vikings to probably the divisional round. But I think that he's too erratic and too inconsistent that against a good team like Philadelphia or the New Orleans Saints, who are charging as well right now, I think Case Keenum becomes a potential liability there. That's why, for me, I'm not changing. I'm not changing here. This is an unwavering statement by me. I still believe that the unknown of Teddy Bridgewater, the potential for having an even higher ceiling, reflects what the Vikings need to do regardless of how well Case Keenum played today, because we know what Case Keenum is. We don't know what Teddy Bridgewater is. It's time that we find out. And I don't care. I'm glad that Keenum played well today, but that doesn't change his title. Still a backup quarterback playing out of his mind. Commend him for it. But for me, this type of football is not good enough to win a Super Bowl.
Right, and I mean that's basically my exact argument right there. There's two schools of thought here. You're either in that category of A, this team right now is a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and with Case Keenum at quarterback, then I think you leave Case Keenum at quarterback. And if you're not convinced yet that this team is a Super Bowl contender, then that's when you think, why would you wait?
Right,
putting off this risk because you don't want to miss out on Teddy Bridgewater taking this team to the next level. Maybe he's the missing piece that would move this team into Super Bowl status. I think we need to also acknowledge that Teddy Bridgewater's situation and his surroundings are astronomically better right now than when he was playing as a starter a couple years ago. First of all, Pat Shurmur has been phenomenal this season, making things, adjusting for Case Keenum's strengths, playing to playing to make things easy for Case Keenum. Plus, you got a solid running game now. You have an offensive line that's much improved. Riley Reif at left tackle hasn't allowed a sack all year. And Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are arguably the top receiving duo in the NFL. I mean, there's a very legitimate argument to be made there. So when you compare that to what Bridgewater had in 2015, it's not at all outlandish to think that he would be more productive now than 2 years ago, even with the rust and not having played a regular season game in 2 years or whatever you want to say there. I mean, look at Case Keenum. It's a perfect example. Look at how he's performed in his career leading up to this season, and look how he's playing this year. I don't think it's. I tend to think it's not because he just magically got better this offseason, or that much better.
Right.
He's in a really good situation. This Minnesota team presents a really good situation for a quarterback to succeed. That's why I think you take a chance with Teddy Bridgewater, because if he could lead a team in 2015 that had a bad offensive line, bad running game, a high volume running game that was successful because of the high volume, and a lack of reliable receivers, to 11-5 in a North title, I feel like he could be much more successful with this team right now, and that's why I side with Bridgewater here. But again, if you really feel like this team right now is a Super Bowl contender, then you have all the right in the world to say I will stick with Case Keenum.
Yeah, and that's the split here, and I'm okay with that split, because at least at this point it's now become a rational split. I think that there is a very solid case, no pun intended, for Keenum moving forward, and I think that there's a very solid case for Bridgewater moving forward as well. I'm okay with either guy. I mean, I make this opinion clear pretty much every show. I don't care.
And this really is a good problem to have, and people say that it's an overused cliche, I think, but when your team has 5 straight wins and you have, and it's even an argument that you take the quarterback out after 5 straight wins, then you have a really good situation on your hands, because that says a lot about the guy that would replace the quarterback, and it also says a lot about the current guy that's leading the 5-game winning streak. So. Right. This is a really good situation for the Vikings, and I'm looking forward to the fireworks this week about this whole thing, because there has been some rumors flying around since the game today that I think Jake Glazer mentioned it on Fox briefly in that overtime show they do, that the Vikings were planning initially to have Teddy start Week 11, and today has maybe changed those plans, and it's very cloudy again. So. We don't know, but I think if the Vikings do go Teddy and it does not work out, then there will be lots of scrutiny coming down on Minnesota, and then they'll have to, then you have to reevaluate going back to Case Keenum, which could cause some more problems as well.
Yeah, Keenum has played well enough, I think, to be named the starter, but the Vikings need to make a decision here now, I think. I think the Vikings, I think out of respect to Keenum and Bridgewater, it's time for one of them to be named the guy moving forward, I think, because like you said, Case Keenum has now won 5 games in a row. You're basically telling him every single week, hey, you're our guy this week. Let's see how you do. Maybe we'll have it next week. And I think that at this point, it's become unfair to him for him to, be treated that way. He should be prepping, knowing, you got to decide on one guy,
right? I mean, Bridgewater has been told, which I mean, this is what kind of the rumors have been, is that Bridgewater has been told he'd start at some point now this season,
right?
And if you're planning for that, and then you kind of go the entire, on a week by week basis the rest of the season, that's kind of unfair to him. It's also unfair to Case Keenum if he doesn't know if his job is safe and he's playing for his job every week and he's got that extra pressure on him. I mean, it's not fair to either player. So I think they do have to make a decision sooner than later. And
it needs to be an announcement too. Like, this just needs to be set in stone. Like, think of it like this: for the better of the entire team. Like, this is important for the wide receivers too. They got to know who their quarterback is going to be moving forward. Just for like in terms of creating chemistry and keeping everyone on the same page. I think it's important that we set. The Vikings come out and set the standard, what it's going to be. And like I said, Bridgewater, there's an argument for Bridgewater, there's an argument for Keenum. I'm okay with both, but the Vikings need to make a decision one way or the other. Just let us know. Name your starter. I'm glad I'm not the one that needs to make this decision, because I think that, like you said, no matter what they do, it's going to be scrutinized unless, the decision works out and whoever they decide is the guy plays extremely well. But that the fact that, if Case Keenum is the guy and he throws an interception next week in the middle of the second quarter, what's going to happen. We all know what's going to happen. That's fact. That's fact. It's going to happen.
Those Teddy chants are going to happen before kickoff, whether he's starting or not.
Correct. So I think you give Teddy a chance. That's my opinion. That's what I think should happen here. I think that he is the better of the two quarterbacks given these circumstances. And I also want to see if I'm right about that, because that's what I believe in what I've seen. That's my opinion. I'm entitled to that, and we'll see what happens. But, I think you can't go wrong by making the move to Bridgewater here. And, if Case Keenum can't handle that switch, then, he's not being Case Keenum, because he's been able to handle that type of a switch his entire career.
That would not be an issue.
That's not an issue to me. It's not even in play. So, in my opinion, you move forward with Teddy Bridgewater. Still another great performance by Case Keenum, but still a backup quarterback. That's his title on this team. That's his role in this company.
See, you mentioned, or you think you said that, with Teddy Bridgewater, you said that the Vikings can't go wrong. And,
right. I don't think they can.
I think they can, but I think that's a risk you have to take. Because of the situation they're in here. You have a guy who, again, he has the higher ceiling, and I don't think that's much of a debate right now.
Right.
And again, we know what he did in 2015 with, Mike Wallace as his number one receiver, with, an offense that gave Adrian Peterson 30 carries a game and forced him to have, 5 and 7 step drops, an offensive line that couldn't protect for more than 2 seconds. And the Vikings still won 11 games and won the division. Now he's in a completely revamped offense under Pat Shurmur with an offensive line that is probably top 10 in the league, and Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen playing out of their minds. It's very fair to expect him to play better than he did in 2015, even with all the rust and the lack of practice and games since 2015. So, I think at the very least you need to consider taking the risk, and sure, acknowledging that it could backfire on you. But if he can take this team that much higher, then I think it's absolutely worth the risk. And if it doesn't work out, you go back to Case Keenum, because this team is still very good with Case Keenum, and he's still a very good quarterback, and he's playing very well right now. That's my take on the situation. And I know we have a lot of hard Case Keenum fans and fans on that side of the argument, and I understand your position completely. This is not one of those completely binary deals. I feel like there's it's very understandable to say Keenum here, right? But I think the difference is it's not because it's why. It's not because if you think it's because Teddy Bridgewater's bad or something like that, then that's where we disagree. But bottom line, I think the Vikings need to see what they have in Teddy Bridgewater, and I think they need to do it as soon as possible, because that's the best way it benefits the team.
So the question then becomes, what's the worst that can happen if it does backfire? How horrible? What's the worst thing that could possibly happen?
Probably, if you put Bridgewater in, if handled right,
yeah,
I'd say that I bet the team would give him 2 games, just because it's Teddy Bridgewater.
Right.
But if he looks bad, really bad in 2 games, they might lose 2 games. And I think look at the schedule right now. These next 2 games are very important, so I'll give you that. The Keenum side of the argument that. But I think it's worth it again, because if Teddy Bridgewater can take the team that much higher and to that next level, I think it's worth the risk. And if you lose 2 games, you're only at 7-4, for example. If it is the next 2 games, you're still probably in the North lead. And then I think you go back to Case Keenum. You finish out the year strong. You have 3 easy games to end the year. I still think the Vikings can be a playoff team and make a playoff run, even if they take this risk and it backfires. I think they're still that deep and that good of a football team that taking this risk, while it would have some repercussions, they can still be successful and make a playoff run.
Yeah, and they do have that 2-game cushion too. Let's keep that in mind here, because they, the Vikings have enough room for error right now. Obviously, you shouldn't, I guess, try to take advantage of that, like by assuming you're going to lose some games here. Like, if you think you're going to lose, then don't put Teddy in. But you do have those 2 games of cushion at this point for him to shake off the rust here. That's just a fact. That's again, no pun intended. That's just the case here. So either way, in my opinion, I don't think the Vikings can really go all that wrong. Either way, Case Keenum and Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion, both 2 good quarterbacks that give the Vikings a good opportunity to win. And part of that is because they have so many great pieces around them on offense here. So let's talk a little bit about some of these other guys. Other than Case Keenum, there's a handful of guys here that contributed strong performances today. There's no, if you're trying to give out one game ball, it's difficult in this situation because you got so many solid performances across the board here. Latavius Murray comes in with 60-plus yards and a touchdown. Adam Thielen had a phenomenal performance. I think it was like 8 receptions, over 150 yards and a touchdown. Diggs, 70 yards and a touchdown. I mean, Jarius Wright, of course, gets his 1 catch and ends up being, a big one and another touchdown for him. Keenum obviously performed very well. Treadwell didn't show up again. Interesting. I guess other than Adam Thielen, who I think is probably the outlier here, who was your star of the day on the offense, with exception to Thielen and Keenum?
Outside of Thielen, that's tough. I'll go with Rashad Hill, because okay. I think him stepping in for Mike Remmers, dealing with Ryan Kerrigan on that side of the Washington defense, it was a big game for him, and I think he was given a lot of responsibility to get Murray and or McKinnon going on the ground, which I think the Vikings, they did not. It wasn't like they didn't blow the Redskins out of the water, but it was enough to where the Redskins had to still kind of play for it. They bit into play action fakes, that type of thing. Right. And then obviously in the pass game, you had to keep Case Keenum clean, and I think Rashad Hill did a pretty good job of that. So I give him the, I guess, offensive player of the game outside of Adam Thielen, of course.
Yeah. I thought the offensive line as a whole was pretty impressive today. I thought Riley Reef struggled a little bit. I believe I counted that he allowed at least 1 quarterback hit, if not more. So he struggled a bit, but overall, solid performance from him. And Rashad Hill, like you said, contributed in a big way today, stepping in for Mike Remmers and kind of continuing where Remmers left off on that right side. The Vikings also ran the ball very effectively as a whole today. I think we saw, and this is kind of what we talked about on the pregame show or the pregame primer show, that we thought the Latavius Murray would get more carries just because he's kind of a bruiser in between the tackles running. We saw that happen today, I think. A lot of the Vikings ran very well inside, in between the tackles there. Murray was effective. I thought McKinnon was also effective in that similar role. So as a whole, this is a fairly complete offensive performance if you think about it across the board. Keenum was efficient and effective throughout the game. The wide receivers were getting open for him and allowing him to be effective. The running game contributed to the passing game. The play action, which you love to talk about so much, was very extremely effective, especially throwing the ball downfield. We saw Diggs get open and Thielen get open on play action fakes. Rudolph contributed, a couple of catches, that safety blanket guy. So, as a whole, this is as good of an overall offensive performance as we have seen from the Vikings in how long? Probably
since week 1, since Bradford.
Yeah, I guess. But this offense is essentially it's as complete as you can get because you have an offensive line that's doing its job, running game is doing its job, quarterback's doing his job, receivers are doing their job. So, will that be the case against the even better opponents? This is a good opponent too. Redskins are not a bad team, folks.
Oh yeah, they're better than their record.
Yeah,
they're so much better than 4-5
for sure.
It's unreal.
This is kind of a statement performance, I think, for a lot of people, and there's a reason why there are these question marks with Case Keenum now because this is kind of a case. This is kind of a statement win for Case Keenum. 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. as a whole, I think this is kind of, to some degree, this should be treated as a coming out party for the Vikings because they just proved on the road that they can beat, a playoff level opponent. I think around the league, the Vikings need to be respected more after this victory, regardless of who's playing quarterback. But as a whole, this is as complete of an offensive performance, top to bottom, as we've seen all year long, including that Saints game week 1.
Yeah, and I think, I hate to say this term again, this is an overused cliche that I don't like, but they're starting to peak, and I peak, I guess, is maybe the wrong word because there's still a bunch of games left, but
right.
They are gradually, they're gradually improving. The trend is in the right direction.
Right.
It's not like this unit's going up and down or it's kind of a downhill trend. It's anything like that. It seems like it's just gradually increasing with each week, and that only can mean good things. So that's another reason that people can hesitate to bring in Teddy Bridgewater is because not only the Vikings winning all their games, but this offense is gradually increasing in efficiency, performance, etc. And just messing that up it takes something a very special situation for that. So I understand that too, but it's just when you get an offense moving up kind of and the trending upwards this way, and you get a defense that for the most part I think today was a little bit off, but for the most part is elite. You have a football team that can really make some damage, and it is funny that they're still being kind of underappreciated when pundits talk about the top NFC teams. Then you get the Eagles, you get the Rams, you get the Saints, you get the Seahawks, the Cowboys. You don't get the Vikings, and you have to wonder when the Vikings will earn that respect. I have a feeling of winning against the Rams would do that, but who knows?
Yeah, you look at all of those teams that get mentioned before the Vikings. Think about it; they have sexier quarterbacks. Seriously, that's what it comes down to.
It is. That's what it is.
It's a handful of they're either elite quarterbacks or they're young quarterbacks that appear to be budding, a la Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz, obviously, and then the elite ones. You got Russell Wilson, Drew Brees. These are the sexier quarterbacks. Other than Case Keenum, who, is starting to show signs of being more Kurt Warner-ish than any of these guys, which is great, but Kurt Warner wasn't adored until The Greatest Show on Turf, right? This is that's why the Vikings are overlooked, and let it be known, we don't care if we're overlooked. If you think we suck, then that's fine. Then you're probably just going to lose some money betting on your team against us because you can't. The Vikings don't win in the sexiest way. I think a lot of people were very, thrilled about the fact the Vikings did put up 38 points today and sort of alleviated some of those concerns about, can they get into a shootout with Drew Brees with Case Keenum at the helm, for example. So you look at this situation, and I think that it's unfair for, the national media to overlook the Vikings moving forward, but let's just be clear here. There's a very obvious template for what the national media or, advertisers are looking for, and that's a sexier quarterback and maybe, a defense that creates more turnovers potentially, highlight reel type plays and marketable players.
That's true. Vikings do just kind of go about their business, win the game, move on. They don't. Besides, wacky celebrations in the end zone, Vikings aren't really that marketable, and it's just. Right. You get Case Keenum at quarterback when you get a defense that it has a bunch of
that's how their coaches
but they just are effective.
And that's how their coaches are too. This roster and team is reflective. It's a reflection of Mike Zimmer and Pat Shurmur, who are two guys who show very little emotion, just go about their business, expect everyone to do their job to the best of their ability. And that's what they're getting right now. They're maximizing the talent of all, across the board on offense. And then let's talk about defense now. We saw that Everson Griffin, it was ruled inactive late. Danielle Hunter came in with a solid performance, I thought. I don't think, he got his sacked at the very end of the game there. I thought that he was fairly solid in run defense, which is something that I was a little bit concerned about with him flipping over to that right side. I thought Brian Robinson at times looked he looked good. He was solid enough, but I don't think he was an impact player. I think it makes sense now why he has become sort of a rotational guy at this stage in his career. He seems to be a little bit slower and with kind of, with greater emphasis put on him greater emphasis on stopping him in particular. I think that you saw him slow down a little bit, but that defensive line as a whole, I thought Tom Johnson stepped up in a big way. Linval Joseph was eating everyone today. Linebackers were solid once again. I think Eric Kendricks led the team in tackles with double digits once again for him. Harrison Smith was flying around. Cornerbacks played well. I mean, what did you think about this defensive performance as a whole? Anyone really stick out to you in particular?
I mean, my first thought, I guess, is that it feels like when I watched this game that Eric Kendricks was responsible for a lot of the bigger plays that Washington was able to create. And obviously the one-handed catch given up by Trey Waynes is kind of like, I mean, you can't really fault him for that. I thought he could have turned his head around, maybe made a play on the ball, but you really can't fault him for that catch.
It took a perfect throw and catch for that to be a touchdown.
Right. And I thought Linval Joseph was really good again. I thought Harrison Smith was really good again. I thought Xavier Rhodes was Xavier Rhodes. He wasn't really tested that many times. I don't remember. It's just I feel like there was a couple of blown or miscommunications on assignments a few times where on probably 2 or 3 plays that cost the Vikings big yardage, and that really seemed to be the difference because those 2 interceptions for Keenum right there, that's 10 points the Redskins got. And if you take those points away, this game isn't really close. So I think there is a bit of a misconception there of where the Redskins have 30 points in this game, and I think that kind of sheds the negative light on the Vikings defense when I think really their defense, the performance wasn't as bad as it looks in the score or in the box score. I do think they were kind of gifted some points thanks to those Case Keenum turnovers. Yeah,
the Case Keenum turnovers, a couple of dumb penalties, untimely penalties that you think about that 15-yard flag for unnecessary roughness on Linval Joseph that extended a touchdown drive. Some stupid mistakes and a couple of bad decisions by Case Keenum on offense. You take a couple of those things away. This is the Vikings might have allowed half of what they did today, but 30 points is 30 points. It took it took a stronger offensive performance today, but to some degree you should be okay with that because this means to me in my head that the offense has the defense's back. If the defense falters a little bit, the offense could be there to pick it up. So long as the defense holds its ground when it needs to. And at the end of the game, the Vikings got some of their biggest plays. Tom Johnson came crashing through to make a great tackle for loss. You saw the Vikings, Mackenzie Alexander basically turned the flow of the game, the momentum with that interception on his 24th birthday, his first of his career. That was great to see. I thought that Trey Waynes was fairly solid overall with exception to, that circus catch. I thought that he was solid today. Andrew Sendejo, a couple of huge plays in this game, knocking the ball out of, I can't remember which receiver, maybe Doxson's hands.
Yeah, a couple of those, actually. Yeah, he had a couple. Jameson Crowder in the end zone for sure once.
Yep.
I think it was a tight end maybe one time too.
Yeah, so, overall, across the board, I think that everyone on defense was fairly solid. There's just a couple of stupid mistakes that hurt this team. I mean, if you look at the box score, how funny is it the fact that they couldn't rush the ball effectively enough with their running backs that Kirk Cousins had 2 touchdowns on 4 carries?
That was so quiet. I didn't even realize until way after the game that he had 2 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Because I had to play against him in fantasy and I didn't like that at all.
Right.
That was dumb. By the way, that QB sneak, definitely not a touchdown that he scored on. Absolutely not. I mean, you can't. The officials gave him about 7-8 seconds to somehow keep going after he hadn't moved anywhere. So I don't know that if forward progress hasn't stopped on that play, then is it ever stopped at all? I don't know.
Yeah,
I hate football rules.
I share a lot of your questions there. It's weird how such an objective sport can have so many subjective calls in it, right? When do you blow the whistle there? I thought it was long as well. I guess that one didn't get ruled in the Vikings' favor, but end of the day, the Vikings' defense held strong at the end of the game. You get a timely turnover from Alexander. You know, some timely, tackles and big plays towards the end of the game to shut down the Washington Redskins' comeback and offense. Overall, solid performance on defense. Leaves a lot to be desired, I think. Definitely a lot of things that, to be cliche, that the Vikings defense needs to clean up. But as a whole, I'm fairly impressed with what the Vikings were able to do against what is a very good offense in Washington. There's some good playmakers there. We saw the best of Chris Thompson today. He was electric. So overall, solid performance, but it took an even better offensive effort than the mean, I guess, to get past the Redskins today. So that's what we're looking at overall. Vikings get another W, 7-2. Not too shabby in my opinion. I don't care how you get there as long as you get there. So let's move on here. Finish up the show with some Twitter takes, questions, whatever. What do you got for us to start here, Drew?
We got one here from, let's see, at drop_dead619. He says,
Okay.
I think Shurmur and Sperano need to be given a lot of credit today, and Shurmur called a hell of a game, and what Sperano's been able to do with his offensive line in the second year as coach is phenomenal, and we need to give our coaches some more credit. So I guess, I'm sure you agree with that, but what do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Pat Shurmur, I want to talk about Pat Shurmur's play design, particularly on the goal line.
Yeah, by the way, I'm gonna add something here too. Mike Zimmer's ears, pretty much asked the same question. Said, is the Vikings coaching staff the most underappreciated in the NFL?
Yeah, we talked about this. I feel like 4 or 5 weeks ago, we talked about how, at this time last year, people were ready to cut Shurmur's head off. That they were done with him, and we've been preaching, give him time to implement his system, and now you're starting to see some of the results, and particularly in the red zone. Vikings today, 5 red zone appearances, 5 touchdowns, and a ton of creativity. The play design for Pat Shurmur, I don't know, man. He's became very impressive as both a play caller and a play designer. Very creative, great timing on a lot of those calls, and you see the type of versatility that he adds, and when he knows, how to use the guys within his offense, give him some time to sort of immerse himself and get his players involved. And these results have been phenomenal. Same can be said about Tony Sperano. People wanted to kick him out after just, felt like 3 weeks they wanted to get rid of Tony Sperano last year. Just give these guys some time to work with their players. Sperano's very hands-on coach. Love him or hate him type guy, and it seems like
it's crazy what happens when you get a healthy team,
right?
Semi-healthy team anyway.
Yeah. It seems like the team is that the offensive line is buying into Tony Sperano's mentality. It's great to see, and I just hope that this is something that is sustainable for both of these guys, because 9 weeks of excellent coaching is great from those two guys. But let's let them finish the race before we hand them the medal. That's my opinion.
Sure. And then kind of bouncing off the Shurmur question, we got this one here from Ben Anderson. That's at Ben Anderson NFL. He asks us, are you, if we're worried about Shurmur heading elsewhere to be a head coach, do you agree, disagree there?
Not really. And part of this is because I remember when Mike Zimmer hired Norv Turner, the Vikings were really happy to get Turner because Turner in particular talked about how he never wanted to be a head coach again. He wanted to be an offensive coordinator. That's all he wanted to be. Now Turner goes out and gets Pat Shurmur to be the tight ends coach. Let's remember how all of this came to be, right? Turner goes out and gets Shurmur. Shurmur's another older guy, maybe a guy that potentially would like to just focus on his specific position. You could talk to a lot of coaches where they prefer to do just their thing as opposed to trying to control everything, which is what a head coach has to do. I think Mike Zimmer is honestly probably a better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, just because it takes a lot of you to be a head coach. You have to stand. Mike Zimmer would love to get rid of the press conferences, right?
Oh yeah.
I think that Pat Shurmur is to some degree the same way. So, am I worried about him walking? Not yet, because I haven't seen Pat Shurmur express a desire to be a head coach again. If he could just get a raise in Minnesota and remain in his position, you're maybe having the most success he's ever had his entire career. Why change that up? I mean, He had a bad experience as a head coach with Cleveland. He's having a great experience as an offensive coordinator in Minnesota. So am I worried about him leaving? Not until he expresses a desire to leave, in my opinion. I think that teams will probably court him this offseason, depending on, how, again, let him finish the race, but depending on how he finishes this year, he will be courted. But does he want to leave? I don't know, and I'm not confident enough to say that that's a guarantee that he does. I think that there's a very real potential that Mike Zimmer and Pat Shurmur want to grow old together. And, this team fits that model, I think.
Yeah, sure. I kind of see where you're coming from, but I'll also say this, that money talks, and we don't know we'll never know, especially with coaches, how much money is a priority and that stuff. But if he gets, money talks.
We also don't know Pat Shurmur too. Like, we don't know if he would be the type of guy that doesn't want to uproot his family, which has been here for like 2 years now, obviously in Minnesota. And those are things that we can't possibly understand because I'm not Pat Shurmur's wife. So, I hope that, I think there is some logic to back either way here, but I think that I call it a gut instinct that I think that Pat Shurmur might just be happy doing what he's doing, a la what Norv Turner was like right before him, because, Turner's the guy who's hired him. Why wouldn't they share a similar offensive philosophy, I suppose, to some degree?
Yeah, for sure. Next question, Matthew Nichols at Matt Nichols 77. Are you worried about the Vikings defense's inability to stop the run today? I think this was disguised a bit by the lead the Vikings had, but do you think, are you concerned about that, given that, the Vikings do have Todd Gurley coming to town next weekend?
Concerned, maybe a little bit. To what extent I am concerned, not all that much. Because this hasn't been a trend, right? The Vikings' run defense has been impressive all season long. Couple lapses today, but you did see them peak, in big moments in terms of stopping the run today. Chris, we got like I said, we got the best of Chris Thompson.
For what it's worth, the Redskins averaged 3 yards a carry today.
Right.
So, it's not like they were lighting it up.
Right.
Samaje Perine had a few nice runs. Chris Thompson had a 14-yarder in there. But, that's not a lot of yards.
Yeah,
You had 81 yards for the game. It's not like – that's a pretty standard game for this group, honestly, for the season. So,
yeah, as a whole, I think you have to be, I don't think there's any reason to be concerned, but – I think there's reason to be concerned about Todd Gurley no matter what, just because it's Todd Gurley, right?
Well, and he does more than just run the ball, too.
Right.
He can catch, and he does other things. So that's a bigger threat than I think him as on the ground.
Right. I think that, I'm more worried about Todd Gurley, the football player, than I am about the Vikings' performance today in Washington and how that relates to the Rams game next week. I think they'll be fine. So,
we got another one about we'll go back to the Case Teddy thing briefly here. Obviously, I think this is kind of a pretty easy question to answer, but do you think Case's near meltdown with the 2 interceptions could speed up Zimmer's decision to play Teddy? So we kind of have talked about this quite a bit, but specifically about those interceptions, how much do you think those play into the decision, if at all?
I think that if he doesn't throw those interceptions, it makes it a lot harder to take him off the field for next week's game. I think because of those interceptions, this is how my mind processes it. Because of those interceptions, we know that Case Keenum is still the same Case Keenum. He's a little bit erratic. It's an uneven overall performance, but he peaks very well. The peak of today's game was a very solid performance, but he's still the same guy. And so for me, those interceptions just reinforce the notion that if the same guy last week before this game wasn't good enough in your opinion to win the Super Bowl, then you still go with Teddy Bridgewater. So no, it doesn't necessarily speed it up, but I think that you're saying, if you believe the same thing you did last week, you didn't see anything this week to change your opinion. So not speed it up, but doesn't really change anything at all in my opinion.
Yeah, see, my spin on this is that, by the way, that was it's at Gardner 40 Robert that asked this question. I really don't think, for me, those interceptions didn't make a difference. because I regardless of how he played today, I still have been under the mindset that you have to find out what Teddy has.
Right.
Because for the most part, Case
Right.
Keenum, we have enough of a sample size to understand that, playing in a much better situation than he's ever been in has lifted him to, lifted his performance into, where he can lead a team that's really talented to wins.
Right.
We know that, especially if those teams, for the most part, are, inferior teams. So the question then becomes of Teddy, like I said before, if he can lift this team to another level, and you have to find that out, you have to take that risk. And if it, costs you a game or whatever, then I think you still take that risk. And if that means taking a guy out after a 4-touchdown, 0-interception game, like it would have been today, I think you still pull the trigger. And it sounds really weird, and it probably sounds backwards to a lot of people, but you have to find that out, because you never want to think, oh, well, we could have made this move and it could have helped us out. I mean, you have to think this is the best football team we have right here on the field. And if you're not thinking that when you lose a game in the playoffs, then I think, for me anyway, I have a tough time living with that. But our last question here, we'll make this one kind of short because I think it's kind of a fun one. From @purple_post, you get to keep one for the future, assuming health is not an issue. Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen?
Assuming health is not an issue?
Yeah.
My only question mark with Stephon Diggs ever is health. So if I'm going to get 16 games with him forever, I'm taking Stephon Diggs. I think he's the overall more talented receiver. Durability is always... honestly, man, I never have any concern with Stephon Diggs except for his durability. With Adam Thielen, I guess I don't really have any major concerns with him either. I like both of these guys a lot. I guess I think that Diggs has an overall higher ceiling if I get 16 games guaranteed out of him.
That's probably true. I'm going to just choose not to answer this because I really like both of them. And it's not fair to pick one or the other here. It's really not. I will say, though, Adam Thielen's contract looks mighty fine right now.
Yeah.
I think it's 3 years, $17 million with up to 20. It's up to $27 million total with incentives and stuff. But
yeah, he's definitely going to hold out at some point.
that's a steal. That's a steal. Which that's nothing new for Vikings fans and the Vikings organization with Rob Brzezinski managing the cap. He's pretty good at that. I mean, look at the guys he signed to extensions this summer: Everson Griffin, Noel Joseph, Xavier Rhodes, and then the last summer Harrison Smith. They're doing all right.
Yeah,
they're doing all right.
Yeah, so the Vikings seem to definitely be in pole position moving forward here. This team continues to get better every single week. Again, as fans, I think that's all we could really ask of them. They come out with another big performance today, an 8-point victory against the Redskins on the road. I think this was as good of an overall performance as we've seen from the Vikings on offense. Defense, solid game. Not going to be good enough against possibly a Philadelphia or another team like maybe a New Orleans, but I'm not going to allow, basically the first time the Vikings defense has allowed 30 points in, I believe, since week 16 last year.
Yeah.
To take away from what this defense has done all season long. Until I see a negative trend this game, that means nothing to me. So overall, strong performance. I'm happy to be 7-2. Again, let me just reiterate this before I see a week of full-on fighting between Bridgewater's and Keenum fans. Enjoy the 7-2 mark. This is great. Think about the last time the Vikings were 7-2, because I don't know when that was. I have
it was 2015, but yeah.
Was it 2015?
They were 7-2. Yeah, yeah, they were 7-2 in 2015. But yeah, point stands. That was kind of fun. That was a fun season still. So.
Yeah. Well, there it is.
Until the very end. But
yeah. All right. Well, we will be back on Wednesday.
Reminder to send us your 280 character tweet,
yes.
And then give us the review on iTunes, and then you will win a Vikings Territory shirt from the collection on Amazon. Great stuff on there. So please send us a tweet at VikingsATLPod, or if you do not have Twitter or are not on Twitter, you can send us should we do an email? Should we do email that way?
That
sure.
works. I mean,
well, Send it to my email. Send it to my email. We'll do it this way. Drew Mahowald, #5 @hotmail.com. Send me an email. Try to get 280 characters if that's possible to even calculate. We'll do it that way, and then you can have that plus the review. You'll be entered for the shirt, and we are going to give the shirt to the best or most creative use of 280 characters. Does not have to be the review itself. I think we had a question about that. So,
yep.
But anyway, there's that contest for you.
All right, sounds good. So you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't already. And yeah, like I said, we'll be back later on this week on Wednesday to first of all announce the winner of the giveaway that Drew just described once again, and also to do some midweek analysis. We'll talk a little bit about the coverage chart. I'll have that filled out by then as well, and plenty of other stuff. Prepping for the LA Rams in what looks like will be a very a mega matchup of sorts here with a couple of powerhouse NFC teams and a lot of momentum coming in for both teams. So we'll talk more about that on Wednesday and Friday. And until then, thanks for being here once again, folks, and we'll catch you later on this week.